Hello there and welcome. Settle in, get comfortable. Find that sweet spot where your head meets the pillow and let your body sink into the mattress. Imagine, if you will, the soft glow of oil lamps, the distant murmur of a bustling city, now hushed by the veil of night. We're not going to rush. There's no need for haste here. Just listen to the soft cadence of my voice and let the gentle current of history carry you to a state of calm. We're going to explore what daily life might have been like for someone living in ancient Rome, focusing on why, perhaps, you and I, with all our modern comforts, might find it a rather challenging experience. It's a journey designed to be soothing, to gently lull you towards sleep. So just relax and let your mind wander. Let's begin our day, not in your cozy bed, but in a very different kind of bedroom. Imagine the faint light of dawn beginning to filter through a small, unglazed window. There are no curtains here, no double pane glass to keep the world out. Perhaps the sounds of the city are already stirring. The distant braying of a donkey, the creak of an ox cart, or the murmur of early risers. You wouldn't be waking up to the gentle hum of an alarm clock or the soft glow of your phone. Instead, your internal clock, perhaps aided by the rising sun, would be your guide. For most Romans, the day began early, often well before sunrise. The concept of a leisurely lie-in was largely unknown, especially if you were not among the very wealthiest. The first thing you might notice as you slowly open your eyes is the distinct absence of, well, a truly private bedroom, unless you were a very wealthy individual with a grand domus or house. Your sleeping arrangements would likely be far more communal. Perhaps you share a small room, or even a single large room with family members. The idea of a personal sanctuary, a quiet space just for you, was a luxury. Your bed itself would be quite different. Forget the plush memory foam or sprung mattress you might be used to. A Roman bed or lectus would typically be a wooden frame, often with interwoven straps supporting a mattress stuffed with straw, reeds, or perhaps wool for the more affluent. It wouldn't be the softest embrace, but it served its purpose. Blankets might be woolen or linen, depending on the season and your status. As you slowly stretch, you might feel the cool morning air. Central heating, as we know it, was a distant dream, while some larger villas had a hypocore system, underfloor heating warmed by furnaces. This was an extravagant luxury, not a common amenity. So the chill of the morning air would be a very real sensation. Getting dressed would be a simple affair for many. For men, a tunica, a simple knee-length woolen or linen garment would be the primary clothing. Women would wear a longer stola over a tunica, sometimes topped with a palla, a kind of shawl. There was no vast wardrobe of fast fashion, no endless choices of colors or styles. Clothing was practical, functional, and often made to last. The concept of constantly changing outfits, or even having separate clothes for sleeping, was not really part of daily life for most. And as for your morning routine, well, let's just say it would lack some of the conveniences you might take for granted. There was no indoor plumbing for most homes, so the idea of stepping into a warm shower or using a private flush toilet was simply unimaginable. This is where one of the most significant differences truly emerges. The Roman concept of hygiene was incredibly different from ours. For the vast majority of Romans, the morning ablutions would involve a trip to the public baths. Imagine a gentle stroll through the waking city, the sounds becoming a little clearer now. The air might carry the scent of wood smoke, baking bread, and perhaps less pleasant odors we'll discuss later. You'd arrive at the baths, which were not just places for washing, but social hubs bustling with activity from dawn until dusk. Inside, you wouldn't find individual cubicles or private showers. The Roman baths were grand, open spaces. You'd likely begin in the apoditerium, a changing room where you'd leave your clothes, perhaps entrusting them to an attendant. Then you might move through a series of rooms, each with a different temperature. The frigidarium was a cold plunge bath, invigorating and refreshing. The tepidarium offered a warm, humid atmosphere, a place to relax and acclimatize. And finally, the coldarium, the hot room, often with a large, heated pool. Here, you might spend time soaking, sweating, and socializing. Washing wasn't just about getting clean with soap as we know it. Romans used olive oil, which they would apply to their skin and then scrape off with a strigil, a curved metal tool, removing dirt, sweat, and oil. It was an effective, if somewhat unusual, method to our modern sensibilities. Picture the soft light filtering through high windows, the gentle splashing of water, and the low hum of conversation. But what about the toilet? This, too, was a public affair. The Roman public latrines were communal benches, often without partitions, where people would sit side by side, conducting their business while chatting with their neighbors. Imagine the lack of privacy, the shared experience. There was no toilet paper. Instead, a sponge on a stick, shared amongst users and rinsed in running water, would be used. It sounds unsanitary to us, but it was their reality. The waste would be carried away by sophisticated sewage systems, a marvel of Roman engineering. But the personal experience was far from our isolated, sanitized bathrooms. So, your morning routine would be a slow, public, and very social ritual. It might take hours, not minutes, to complete your washing and prepare for the day. You'd catch up on gossip, conduct business, exercise, and generally mingle with your fellow citizens. It was a vital part of Roman social life, but a stark contrast to our private, solitary morning preparations. As you emerge from the bustling baths, feeling refreshed or at least clean by Roman standards, your thoughts might turn to breakfast, but don't expect a lavish spread of eggs, bacon, and toast. The Roman breakfast, orientaculum, was typically a very light meal, if eaten at all. Many Romans would simply grab a quick bite on the go, or even skip it entirely. What might constitute a Roman breakfast? Perhaps a piece of bread dipped in olive oil, or perhaps some fruit, like figs or dates. Leftovers from the previous night's dinner might also be consumed. There was no tradition of a hearty morning meal to fuel the day. Drinks would include water, or perhaps a diluted wine. Coffee and tea, of course, were unknown. The focus was less on elaborate culinary experiences and more on sustenance. So, if you're someone who relies on a robust breakfast to kickstart your day, you might find yourself feeling a little peckish in ancient Rome. The emphasis was on getting to work or to your daily duties, rather than lingering over a meal. Food was often seen as fuel, especially for the working classes. The concept of breakfast as a special, enjoyable occasion was largely reserved for later centuries. Imagine stepping out onto the bustling streets of Rome. This is where the sensory experience truly begins, and it would be vastly different from what you're accustomed to. The streets were not paved with smooth asphalt, but often with rough cobblestones, uneven and challenging to navigate, especially in sandals. The sounds would be a constant symphony of urban life, the shouts of street vendors hawking their wares, the rumble of carts and chariots, the chatter of crowds, the distant bleating of animals being driven to market. There was no quiet hum of electricity, no distant drone of traffic in the sky. Instead, the air was filled with the raw, unfiltered sounds of human and animal activity. And the smells, oh, the smells. This is perhaps where the greatest challenge would lie for our modern sensibilities. Imagine a potent mix, the sweet scent of baking bread from a nearby bakery, mingling with the pungent aroma of human and animal waste. Public sanitation, while advanced for its time, was not perfect. Garbage was often thrown into the streets, contributing to the general olfactory assault. Animals were an integral part of city life. Horses, donkeys, and oxen pulling carts would leave their droppings on the streets. Chickens, pigs, and other livestock might also be seen, especially in the more residential or market areas. So, the streets were not just a visual spectacle, but an aromatic one as well. Walking would require constant vigilance. There were no designated sidewalks in many areas, and the streets were shared by pedestrians, carts, and animals. The concept of traffic laws was rudimentary at best. Navigating the chaotic thoroughfares would be an exercise in agility and awareness, and if you weren't careful, you might step into something unpleasant. The city itself was densely populated, with multi-story apartment buildings called insulae towering over narrow streets. These buildings, often made of brick and wood, were prone to collapse and fire, adding another layer of danger to daily life. The lower floors might house shops and workshops, while the upper floors were rented out to poor families. Imagine the sheer number of people. Rome was a truly massive city for its time, with a population that could have reached over 1 million. This meant crowded streets, crowded markets, and a constant press of humanity. If you used a personal space, you might find yourself feeling overwhelmed by the sheer proximity of so many people. As you navigate the bustling streets, you'd be heading towards your daily duties. For most Romans, life revolved around work. The vast majority of the population were not wealthy, and their days were spent in various forms of labor. If you were a craftsman, you might spend your day in a small workshop, perhaps a potter, a blacksmith, or a weaver. The work would be manual, often physically demanding, and the hours long. Imagine the repetitive motions, the heat of the forge, or the intricate details of weaving, all done without the aid of modern machinery. Farmers would be out in the fields, toiling under the sun, planting, harvesting, and tending to livestock. Their lives were dictated by the seasons and the rhythms of nature. There were no tractors, no advanced irrigation systems. It was back-breaking work, vital for feeding the vast population of Rome. Merchants would be in the bustling forums and markets, haggling over prices, buying and selling goods from across the vast Roman Empire. Imagine the vibrant chaos of the market, the cries of vendors, the array of goods, exotic spices, fine textiles, pottery, and produce. For the educated elite, work might involve legal cases, political meetings, or scholarly pursuits. They might spend their mornings receiving clients in their homes, a ritual known as the salutatio, where clients would visit their patron to seek favors or offer greetings. This was a crucial part of the Roman social hierarchy, reinforcing the bonds between patrons and clients. The Roman workday was not structured around our modern 9 to 5 schedule. The concept of a weekend, or regular days off, was largely absent. Work was often continuous, with religious festivals and public holidays offering the main breaks from labor. So, if you enjoy your weekends and annual leave, you might find the Roman work ethic a little relentless. However, the Romans did value leisure, and their afternoons often offered opportunities for relaxation, especially for those who could afford it. After a morning of work, many Romans would return to the public baths, not just for hygiene, but for socializing, exercise, and relaxation. Lunch, or prandium, was another relatively light meal. Much like breakfast, it was a quick break from the day's activities, often consumed around midday. Again, don't expect a gourmet experience. A typical lunch might consist of bread, cheese, olives, and perhaps some cold meat or fruit. It was a functional meal, designed to stave off hunger until the main meal of the day, which would be eaten in the late afternoon or early evening. Imagine sitting on a simple wooden bench, perhaps in a bustling tavern or a quiet corner of your home, quickly consuming your midday meal before returning to your duties. The pace of life was generally slower in terms of technology, but relentless in terms of physical labor and social obligations. After lunch, or perhaps earlier in the day, you might find yourself in the Roman Forum, the bustling heart of the city. Imagine a vast open space surrounded by magnificent temples, basilicas, and government buildings. This was the center of Roman public life, where business was conducted, laws were debated, and speeches were delivered. The Forum would be teeming with people, senators in their togas, merchants, soldiers, ordinary citizens, and slaves. The air would be filled with the murmur of voices, the clang of tools from nearby workshops, and the sounds of public announcements. It was a vibrant, often noisy, place reflecting the energy and ambition of Rome. Here, you might see a lawyer pleading a case, a politician addressing a crowd, or simply people meeting friends and conducting their daily affairs. The Forum was a place of power, commerce, and social interaction, a microcosm of Roman society. But it was also a place where the social hierarchies were starkly visible. The wealthy and powerful, in their distinctive togas, would command respect and attention, while the poorer citizens and slaves would occupy a lower rung on the social ladder. There was no pretense of equality in Roman society. Everyone knew their place. As the afternoon wears on, the thoughts of many Romans would turn to entertainment. The Romans were masters of public spectacles, and these were a vital part of daily life, offering diversion, entertainment, and a way for the emperors to maintain popular support. The famous bread and circuses. Perhaps you'd head to the Circus Maximus, a massive arena designed for chariot races. Imagine the roar of the crowd, the thundering hooves of horses, the bright colors of the chariots as they race around the track. The excitement would be palpable, the stakes high, with fortunes won and lost on the outcome of a single race. It was a thrilling, often dangerous, spectacle, drawing vast crowds. Or perhaps you'd go to the Colosseum, the iconic amphitheater, to witness gladiatorial contests. This is where things get a little intense, even for our soothing historical journey. While we won't dwell on the graphic details, suffice it to say that these were brutal spectacles, often involving combat to the death between gladiators, or between gladiators and wild animals. The crowds were bloodthirsty, cheering for their favorites, and the atmosphere was charged with excitement and violence. These spectacles were not just entertainment, they were expressions of Roman power, displays of military might, and a way to reinforce social order. For the average Roman, they offered a thrilling escape from the daily grind, a chance to witness heroism, brutality, and spectacle on a grand scale. For us, with our modern sensibilities, the idea of finding entertainment in such violent displays might be unsettling. It's a stark reminder of the cultural differences that would make living in ancient Rome such a challenge. Beyond these grand spectacles, there were other forms of entertainment. Plays were performed in theatres, often comedies or tragedies, offering a more refined form of diversion. Music and dance were also popular, especially at private banquets and festivals. And for those who enjoyed intellectual pursuits, there were libraries and philosophical discussions. As the sun begins to set, casting long shadows across the city, the thoughts of Romans would turn to the main meal of the day, dinner or cena. This was the most important meal, often eaten in the late afternoon or early evening, and it could be a simple family affair or a lavish banquet, depending on your social standing. For most ordinary Romans, dinner would be a simple meal, eaten with the family. Staples would include bread, porridge pulse, vegetables like lentils, beans, and cabbage, and perhaps some cheese or olives. Meat was less common, a luxury for many, and would usually be pork, chicken, or fish. Imagine a simple table, perhaps a low one, where the family would gather. There would be no elaborate cutlery sets. Romans often ate with their fingers, using knives for cutting and spoons for soups or stews. Forks were not widely used. It was a communal, unpretentious way of eating. For the wealthy, dinner could be a much more elaborate affair, a convivium or banquet. Imagine reclining on couches arranged around a low table, while slaves served multiple courses of exotic dishes. These banquets could last for hours, filled with rich food, fine wine, entertainment, musicians, dancers, poets, and lively conversation. The food at these banquets could be incredibly diverse and opulent. Oysters from distant shores, exotic birds, elaborate sauces, and sweet pastries. It was a display of wealth and status, a chance to impress guests and solidify social connections. Wine, often diluted with water, would flow freely. But even for the wealthy, dining was a messy affair by our standards. Vomiting was sometimes encouraged during banquets to allow guests to continue eating, a rather unappetizing detail that speaks to the different cultural norms around food and etiquette. So, your Roman dinner experience could range from a humble, nutritious meal to an extravagant, indulgent feast. Either way, it was a central part of Roman social life, a time for family, friends, and sometimes impressive displays of hospitality. As night fully descends upon Rome, the city would transform. Without widespread artificial lighting, the streets would become incredibly dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of oil lamps from homes and taverns, and the moon and stars above. Imagine navigating these dark, uneven streets. There were no streetlights as we know them. If you had to venture out after dark, you'd need a lantern or a torch, and perhaps a companion, for the night held its own dangers. Crime was a significant concern in ancient cities, and Rome was no exception. Robbery, assault, and other forms of violence were more common after dark. The narrow, Winding alleys and unlit thoroughfares provided ample opportunities for criminals. So, the idea of a leisurely evening stroll was largely out of the question for most. The sounds of the night would be different too. The barking of dogs, the distant cries of night watchmen, and perhaps the sounds of revelry from taverns or private homes. The city never truly slept, but its rhythm changed dramatically once the sun went down. For the wealthy, their homes or domus would offer a sanctuary, a private space lit by oil lamps and candles. They might spend their evenings reading, dictating letters, or enjoying the company of their families and slaves. For the vast majority living in insulae, the night would bring a different kind of experience. These multi-story apartment blocks were often overcrowded, noisy, and offered little in the way of privacy. The sounds of neighbors, thin walls, and the constant threat of fire would be part of the nightly routine. Imagine trying to fall asleep with the sounds of your neighbors, perhaps a crying baby or distant conversations filtering through thin walls. There was no soundproofing, no quiet suburbia. Life was lived in close proximity, and privacy was a luxury. And what if you were to fall ill in ancient Rome? This is another area where modern life offers immense advantages. Roman healthcare, while surprisingly advanced in some areas, was a far cry from what we experience today. There were no hospitals as we know them for the general public, while the Roman army had sophisticated medical care for its soldiers. Ordinary citizens relied on a mix of folk remedies, home care, and a variety of practitioners. You might consult a medicus, a doctor whose understanding of anatomy and medicine was based on observation and ancient theories, not modern scientific principles. Surgeries were performed often without anesthesia, and the risk of infection was incredibly high due to the lack of understanding of germs and sterilization. Imagine the fear of even a simple cut, which could easily become infected and lead to a life-threatening illness. Childhood mortality rates were incredibly high, and life expectancy was significantly lower than today. Many common ailments that we easily treat with antibiotics or simple procedures could be fatal in ancient Rome. The concept of public health was understood to some extent, with the famous Roman aqueducts bringing fresh water into the city, and the Cloaca Maxima, the great sewer, carrying away waste. But individual hygiene and the understanding of disease transmission was limited. So, if you're used to readily available medical care, antibiotics, and a comprehensive understanding of disease, you might find yourself feeling incredibly vulnerable in ancient Rome. A simple fever or a broken bone could be a very serious, even life-threatening event. What about the law? Roman law was incredibly complex and sophisticated for its time, forming the basis for many legal systems today. However, your experience with justice in ancient Rome would depend heavily on your social status. For citizens, there were established courts and legal procedures. You could plead your case, hire a lawyer and advocatus, and participate in the legal process. However, the system was often slow, bureaucratic, and influenced by social standing and political connections. For the poor, and especially for slaves, justice could be much harsher and less fair. Punishments for crimes could be brutal, ranging from public flogging to crucifixion for serious offences. There was no concept of rehabilitation as we understand it, and the focus was often on deterrence and punishment. Imagine the constant awareness of social hierarchy and its impact on every aspect of life, including the law. There was no illusion of everyone being equal under the law in the way we aspire to today. And what about the safety net? There was no social security, no unemployment benefits, no widespread public welfare system. If you couldn't work, if you fell ill, or if you lost your livelihood, your fate would largely depend on your family, your friends, or your patron. Life was often a precarious existence with little to buffer you from hardship. Finally, imagine the challenge of language. While Latin was the official language of Rome, the vast empire was a melting pot of different tongues. Greek was widely spoken in the eastern provinces, and many other local languages persisted. Even within Rome itself, while Latin was dominant, there would be various dialects and accents. Learning Latin, a complex language with intricate grammar and a vast vocabulary, would be a daunting task. Imagine trying to communicate your needs, understand directions, or participate in daily life without knowing the language. Even understanding simple things like prices in the market or instructions from your employer would be a constant struggle. The barrier of language would isolate you, making it difficult to fully integrate into Roman society. So, as we slowly bring our journey to a close, imagine yourself tired, but perhaps a little wiser, gently drifting back from ancient Rome. You've experienced a day without central heating, without private bathrooms, without modern medicine, and without the constant hum of technology. You've walked on cobblestone streets filled with the sounds and smells of a different era, navigated crowded forums, and witnessed spectacles that would both thrill and shock. It's a world vastly different from our own, a testament to how far humanity has come in terms of comfort, convenience, and safety. While Rome was a marvel of its time, a powerful and influential civilization, its daily life was often harsh, challenging, and demanding. As you lie there now, feeling the warmth of your bed, the quiet of your room, and the soft comfort of your pillow, appreciate these simple pleasures. The gentle hum of your refrigerator, the soft glow of a distant streetlight, the knowledge that a warm shower is just a few steps away. These are luxuries that Romans could only dream of. Let the images of ancient Rome slowly fade from your mind. The bustling streets, the grand baths, the distant roar of the crowd. Let them become soft, hazy memories. Feel your breathing deepen, your muscles relax. The day is done, and the world of ancient history can now rest. Just breathe slowly, in and out. Let the last whispers of this story gently guide you deeper into slumber. You are safe, you are warm, and you are comfortable. There's nothing more to do, nowhere else to be, but here, now, drifting softly to sleep. Good night, sweet dreams.